Hello and welcome to the fourth live stream of the 18th Brumaire of Joe Biden. Here we have today a very full house. We've got all the way from Canada. We got our Kyle. How's it going, Kyle?
Pretty good, pretty good. Favorite chapter. Let's go.
Let's do it. All the way from not too far from me in London, we got James recovering, looking slightly like a cancer victim, but it really is a coronavirus victim.
Yeah, recovered from the Rona, ready for some Brumaire Dense Chapter 3. Let's go.
Let's do it. Then next along is the Narcom of our nation, looking suave, thin, look like he's eating organic vegetables, not doing anything bad, no giving up the crack, the meth, the whole lot. Derek, how's it going?
I'm pretty good. I'm pretty much meth free here in Utah, which is kind of rare. And I have not caught Rona yet, although I may have actually in February. So that's another story. You're now going to know why I called Jacobin magazine Gerongian and Orleanist for so long.
Orleanist, that's a bit harsh, but let's go. I'm going to call him legitimist. Next we have Esri, all the way from which planet are you from, Esri?
I don't know, New York metro area. That's all people need to know.
You go.
That's the most credible way of saying it.
Yeah. You know, a New Yorker would call New York a planet. Okay, next up is Sophie, all the way down south, deep in the mangroves of Arizona.
In the what?
There are no groves in Arizona. You're thinking of the spicy Southwest.
I know. I've never been sarcastic. It's a desert. I fucking know. I've been there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put my yee up your haw if you don't shut up.
Well, I don't even know what that means. Let's keep going. Okay. Now, today we have with us the third chapter, the 18th. What's it called? There's the chapter. What's the name they give it here? We have it. They call it the defeat of the petty bourgeois democracy. Last week we had the downfall of the pure Republicans. This week we've got the defeat of the petty bourgeois democracy. Okay, this chapter is, honest to God, it's a goddamn beast. We're going to nearly have to read every single paragraph of this fucker because it's that damn good. Now, I'm going to give over the first reading part of it to Kyle because he's got a very bombastic, good voice, and it's a good way to start us all off. All of us we all have to like up our game seriously because when Kyle reads, it's
all right. Where am I reading to?
Oh shit! I have to share the screen here. Let me see now. Okay,
got it. So it's up to red breeches. Okay. On May 28, 1849, the Legislative National Assembly met. On December 2nd, 1851, it was dispersed. This period covers the span of life of the constitutional or parliamentary republic. In the First French Revolution, the rule of the constitutionnaliste is followed by the rule of the Girondist, and the rule of the Girondist by the rule of the Jacobin. Each of these parties relies on the more progressive party for support. As soon as it has brought the revolution far enough to be unable to follow it further, still less to go ahead of it, it is thrust aside by the bolder ally that stands behind it and sent to the guillotine. The revolution thus moves along an ascending line. It is the reverse with the revolution of 1848. The Proletarian Party appears as an appendage of the petty bourgeois Democratic Party. It is betrayed and dropped by the latter on April 16, May 15, and in the June days. The Democratic Party, in its turn, leans on the shoulders of the bourgeois Republican Party. The bourgeois Republicans no sooner believe themselves well established than they shake off the troublesome comrade and support themselves on the shoulders of the Party of Order. The Party of Order hunches its shoulders, lets the bourgeois Republicans tumble, and throws itself on the shoulders of armed force. It fancies it is still sitting on those shoulders when one fine morning it perceives that the shoulders have transformed themselves into bayonets. Each party kicks from behind at the one driving forward and leans over in front towards the party which presses backward. No wonder that in this ridiculous posture it loses its balance and, having made the inevitable grimaces, collapses with curious gyrations. The revolution thus moves in a descending line. It finds itself in this state of retrogressive motion before the last February barricade has been cleared away and the first revolutionary authority constituted. The period that we have before us comprises the most motley mixture of crying contradictions. Constitutionalists who conspire openly against the Constitution, revolutionists who are confessedly constitutional, a National Assembly that wants to be omnipotent and always remains parliamentary, a Montaigne that finds its vocation in patience and counters its present defeats by prophesying future victories, royalists who form the Patres Conscripti, or elders of the Republic, are forced by the situation to keep the hostile royal houses they adhere to abroad, and the Republic, which they hate, in France. An executive power that finds its strength in its very weakness and its respectability in the contempt that it calls forth. A republic that is nothing but the combined infamy of two monarchies, the Restoration and the July monarchy, with an imperial label. Alliances whose first provisio is separation, struggles whose first law is indecision, wild, inane agitation in the name of tranquility, most solemn preaching of tranquility in the name of revolution, passions without truth, truths without passions, heroes without heroic deeds, history without events, development whose sole driving force seems to be the calendar, wearying with constant repetition of the same tensions and relaxations, antagonisms that periodically seem to work themselves up to a climax only to lose their sharpness and fall away without being able to resolve themselves, pretentiously paraded exertions and Philistine terror at the danger of the world's coming to an end, and at the same time the pettiest intrigues and court comedies played by the world redeemers, who in their laissez-aller remind us less of the day of judgment than of the times of the Fronde. The official collective genius of France brought to naught by the artful stupidity of a single individual. The collective will of the nation, as often as it speaks through universal suffrage, seeking its appropriate expression through the inveterate enemies of the interests of the masses, until at length it finds in the self-will of a filibuster. If any section of history has been painted gray on gray, it is this. Men and events appear as reverse schlemmels, as shadows that have lost their bodies. The revolution itself paralyzes its own bearers and endows only its adversaries with passionate forcefulness. When the red specter, continually conjured up and exercised by the counter-revolutionaries, finally appears, it appears not with the Phrygian cap of anarchy on its head, but in the uniform of order, in red breeches.
Okay, that in that paragraph has to be one of the longest sentences in the English language. You realize that it goes for I think it's about 200 words. That is a hell of a sentence.
That's common in German, though.
It's a chonker.
It's got about 400 clauses in there, yet it reads well. It's incredible. Okay, so
almost like what they teach you in writing class isn't absolute law.
Yeah,
so it's actually punctuated correctly too, so it's not a run-on. But anyway, in German, I've read a lot. In German, I read 4-page sentences sometimes. It's pretty crazy. They have this.
Yeah, but those sentences are one word.
Mm.
Well, this may be in German. I have to go back and check it.
Yeah.
I will say that when I was reading this, because I have a different translation, it's very close to this translation. So this must be crystal clear in German.
Yeah, so he's got an incredible concept here. I is in this first paragraph, or before one of the early paragraphs, where he basically talks about how the dynamic in this revolution is backwards from the 1793 revolution. Why do we think that this so in the 1793 revolution he talks about how it's the most the most radical group was constantly pushing forward, and here it seems to be the most radical groups as they seem to be leaning more on the most conservative elements all the way once the proletarians got their heads kicked in. So why do we think this is the case?
Well, I mean, I think it has to do with what we were talking about in the previous chapter, as far as or not the previous chapter, but the first chapter, as far as like first as tragedy, then as farce. And I think he's kind of making that broader, dare I say, dialectical point. But maybe I'm missing something.
But is there like what is the dynamic? Like what are the reasons behind the dynamic? Like it's not more than just saying, "Oh, history's repeating itself." What are
There's
the
a financial
social forces?
There's a financial panic in France in 1847. I mean, like that's part of it. That's part of what led to the Blancas workhouses. And
there's a famine as well, Derek, isn't there?
Yeah,
there's a famine, like Irish
too.
famine and these other potato famines.
I don't know what the explanatory like balance of class forces is behind it. I can only echo what Sophie's saying, where like this is the dynamic of a farce, of a revolution. A revolution has a certain structure. Actually, I think Mike Duncan might have crypto quoted Marx when he was talking about his approach to looking at like, where a revolution ends. And he's talking about like, the more radical faction dispensing with other things. But this is a dynamic of a farce. This is like when you immediately lose your social mandate and it's just dwindling from there. It's like, Occupy Wall Street or something.
I think Marx places it with the defeat of the proletarian faction at the outset. And the proletarian faction being unable to achieve any leadership in this dynamic. And therefore, that red specter being there, but a progressively more and more reactionary result being attained.
Right. What didn't in the French Revolution the sans-culottes didn't the Jacobin kind of they would use them manipulatively and cynically, but like they were around, and they weren't even really like a properly like organized proletarian faction as much as what you had in 1848. But the key difference is that the revolutionaries just immediately turned on that faction, whereas in the French Revolution, they let that faction exist and use them cynically, but that faction was there. And I'm specifically referring to the Jacobins using the sans-culottes cynically.
Well, I mean, they start turning on them when like the sans-culottes become more and more sympathetic to like the enragés. So towards the end of the Terror, there's more hostility, and also all the expansionist wars start dwindling a lot of what would have been the people in the sans-culottes. When we look at this, so I think there's a couple of things you gotta like keep it. There's a famine going on because of bourgeois monocropping, right? Really, it's what's causing it. It's related to the potato famine. Once the proletarian faction is defeated, where are the peasants gonna go? Because they're starving. The executive power, right? Exactly.
But they were never really they were always with the executive power, were they not? Were they not were the peasants not really the a lot of the votes for Napoleon and the party border?
It was the peasants and the and like a faction of the petty-bourgeois, it seems. But the party border gets more and more into it, because where are the peasants going to go? Period. End of discussion. Like the peasants don't have any. And that's a very different role than peasants played in the revolution in the first French Revolution. Even though you have the Vendée, which were the peasants are a reactionary faction, former peasants make up most of the sans-culottes. We don't really have a proletariat yet. So, like, you have a urban peasant, declassed by urbanism population, and you have the peasants in the Vendée who are still highly attached to the church, which is also a lot of their social and welfare function, and so they have a tendency to be reactionary. And the first French Revolution, for religious reasons, it doesn't seem like it's religious reasons motivating them into the party of order now.
Is there a case to be made that in the first French Revolution, the revolutionary class, the bourgeois, was pretty much fully formed, whereas in the this revolution here, the revolutionary class, which seems to have been primarily the proletariat. The proletariat still by this stage were only really formed in the city of Paris and maybe some other places, that they still were not fully formed. So it wasn't an equivalent comparison.
Right. I think that's true. And I think the other issue, I mean, when I talked about the revolutions of 1848 in general, that's one of the things that came up over and over again is the proletariat wasn't fully formed, and it was still highly tied into in other places in the nationalist movements, not in the same way in France. But when you look at in the specific context of France, it seems like you have a half-formed proletariat, but the proletariat's really not running the economy. And it's different from England because while England didn't have a lot of land reforms or whatever, England's enclosure movements meant that peasants weren't peasants. They were like, either yeomen or they were agrarian workers. They were literally laborers. They were an agricultural proletariat. And that's not what you have in France.
I think another thing is that the bourgeoisie initially takes a revolutionary act here, right? Especially the petty bourgeoisie, they are overthrowing the Orleanists, but unlike in the Ancien Regime, the composition of the ruling class and the form of government they have is very contradictory, right? Like the bourgeoisie comes to power, they form the republic, but then their social interests are immediately opposed to the proletariat, and their composition is mixed up with the royalist factions. The royalist factions, as Marx will say in this chapter, they find the republic to be suitable for their class rule, but they can't really stay satisfied with the republic for both their sectional interests and also because it's kind of embarrassing to be royalist Republicans. And so, like, this is... I think what I'm getting at is that the dominant faction that would be overthrown is itself kind of like it's devouring itself and not really reactionary in exactly the same way that the Ancien Regime was.
But yet it devours itself. And it's not like the process that the reactionary de Maistre is zooming in on, where you have like weatherman effect writ large. We need to get pure and pure. The direction is getting more and more like obviously like betraying their principles or whatever. Like the monarchical Republicans get it the worst of this. Like they, Marx has, pretty scathing things to say about all parties involved, but he has the least respect for them. And this is a revolution that Marx was like looking forward to. This is the revolution that the Communist Manifesto is most immediately pointing towards. Like Marx had high hopes for this.
Yeah. When you read his notes on the International, he's always talking about how the working class had actually become more regressive since 1848, which is very interesting when you read this, right? But it's he was always getting frustrated with the kinds of deals he had to make in the First International, with and with the groups are trying to deal with the groups that would make up the SPD in Germany, and he would always compare it to 1848, which again, I found fascinating because he's always getting crap from the anarchist faction for not fighting in any country.
But
Okay, will we move on? Ezra,
Sure.
you okay? Sorry, I interrupted there. I was struggling with my mute button.
no, it's all good. I had a thought, floated away. It'll come back.
What? You sure? Okay. Well, then the next bit, he's just going to talk a little bit about what the makeup of the new Legislative National Assembly was. So this was the kind of parliament that was voted in December 1848, at the same time when Bonaparte got made president. Now, there were 750 seats. About 500 of them went to the Party of Order, okay? And that was split between the three basically main factions. The Orleanists, so that was basically the castle, those that supported the Orleanist family's claim to the throne, which was backed by the kind of financial capital, new industrial bourgeoisie. And you had the Legitimists, which was the Legitimists were basically the old original king's line, who were basically representing the landed gentry. And also in the Party of Order, then you had a small faction. So only a small faction, I think, with about 50 seats was actually it was Party of Order. The Bonapartists. So the Bonapartists didn't, I'm not exactly sure how many they had actually, but they were not large enough to even form their own independent party. So you had the Party of Order, which was the big block of around 500 seats. You had 50 pure Republicans, who we talked about getting shafted last week. And then we had about 200 of the Montagne. Okay, so this is the mountain that was the so-called, this is the Social Democrats, or what do we call them? Petty-bourgeois democracy. So this is the party of the Social Democrats. And we're going to find out here more about what happens to this all great mix-up. So that's the kind of balance of forces. 500 in the Party of Order, split between the Legitimists, the Orleanists, and the Bonapartists. And then we've got 200 in the Montagne, the mountain, which is the Social Democrats. And then we have our Democratic, what do we call them? We call them Social Democrats. Is that what we're calling them?
I mean, Marx does, according to this translation.
Yeah.
Let's call them that. Yeah.
I was surprised to see that. I was surprised to see Social Democrat being like a faction here by name.
So led by their leader, Bernie Sanders, who I think is going to get knifed and is going to be taken over by the 18th Brumaire Joe Biden. I think that's what the book's about. I don't want to ruin the plot for people, but that's where it's going. Okay.
Spoilers.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. And finally, a rump of 50 pure Republicans there left. Okay, so let's see. Where was I going to go from? Stop cursing, Tom. Here. Okay. Okay. So let's have a little read here of what he talks about.
The period. Is it that one?
Sorry. Thus, it was. I'm finding it hard because these paragraphs are so long here.
It's a heckin' chonker.
Okay, and
just make sure you let me read the period paragraph. You know.
Okay, you just take it there
For
yourself.
obvious reasons.
Yeah, take it.
All right. The period that we have before us comprises the most motley picture of crying contradictions.
Where is this? Sorry, whereabouts is this one?
This is like the fourth thing. Did we already read this? I don't think so.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, I read that. It's one after that.
Titties.
Yeah.
Okay, well then, in that case, there is one thing that I forgot to mention. That again, for those of you keeping score of what Marx might think of Stalinism, and you know, Tom, when you're listening to this back, you can just cut and paste this. This is the thought I forgot. When the red specter, continually conjured up and exercised by the counter-revolutionary, finally appears, it appears not with the Phrygian cap of anarchy on its head, but in the uniform of order in red breeches. Like red breeches, I suppose. Yeah, that's Marx being like, yeah, remember when socialist iconography was revolutionary? This is the difference.
You know, maybe that explains the weird tendency of anarcho-tanky alliances. I mean, like, because that's something I've never understood, but see all the time.
This is, I don't want to digress too much, but I think that has to more do with like national liberation and Maoism than it has to do with whatever this is.
But okay, I mean, the thing is, when I was talking, when you talk about national liberation, the Marxist weirdness on national liberation actually completely comes up from this period, because they could not figure out how to deal with the European nationalist movements. And it was a constant thorn in his side in the First International, even though he was aligned in the First International with Garibaldi. And so, like, all that comes up. How the anarchists and Marxists even start, like, you know, Mike Duncan covers this pretty well, but how the anarchists and Marxists even start, like, talking has to do with their mutual support of national unification and national liberations in the failing medieval empires. And so those stances come in from that period. And that plays into the way Marx views the U.S. Civil War. It plays into a lot of things, but it creates problems later. And so, like, I think it goes all the way back to here. Marx is, like, recognizing this.
That's fair. Yeah, no, I mean, anarchists were in some ways even more, in this period, were even more pro-nat lib than the Marxists were.
But in this case, though, in that sentence, Marx has sympathy for the Phrygian cap of anarchy and that red tradition, and seemingly disdain for the red breeches, the uniform of order. Like, that this is one of its farcical elements, the way that it abuses history.
All right.
Now we can move on.
Now we can move on.
Shipwreck Pure Republicans, because I love this one.
Yeah,
just before, let's just
let me read this one.
Just these few lines before, Derek. Yeah.
Okay. Let's Ezra, go.
Just the few lines before, or the whole shebang?
Go do the whole shebang. I don't care.
All right. This is anarchy. We've seen that the ministry which Bonaparte installed on December 20th, 1848, on his Ascension Day, was a ministry of the Party of Order, of the Legitimists and Orleanist coalition. This Barreau Fallot ministry had outlived Fallot, thank you. This Barreau Fallot. Okay. This Barreau Fallot ministry had outlived the Republican Constituent Assembly, whose terms of life it had more or less violently cut short, and found itself still at the helm. Changarnier.
Yeah.
Okay, Changarnier, the general of the Allied Royalists, continued to unite in his person the general command of the 1st Army Division and of the National Guard of Paris. Finally, the general elections had secured the Party of Order a large majority in the National Assembly. Here, deputies and peers of Louis-Philippe encountered a hollow host of legitimists, for whom many of the nation's ballots had become transformed into admission cards to the political stage. The Bonapartist representatives of the people were too sparse to be able to form an independent parliamentary party. They appeared merely as the mauvaise evil appendage of the Party of Order. Thus, the Party of Order was in possession of the governmental power, the army, and the legislative body. In short, of the whole of the state power. Legislative body, state power, Marx said so. It had been morally strengthened by the general elections, which had made its rule appear as the will of the people, and by the simultaneous triumph of the counter-revolution on the whole continent of Europe. Never did a party open its campaign with greater resources or under more favorable auspices.
Okay. So he's really setting the stage here for, like, you know, the dominant position of the Party of Order. Yet, within, 2 years, the Parliament was gone and they were either on the run or like, I don't know. Well, none of them got killed, did they? Did any of them get killed? Nobody. It was bloodless.
What?
So, does this remind you of something? It reminds me of something. It reminds me of, I don't know, maybe when the Democrats controlled all
Yeah.
branches of government in 2008 and couldn't do anything with it and were deposed within 2 years except for the executive.
Yeah. That is like what that last bit reminds me of deeply. Although the Democrats, that's a proud Democratic Party tradition,
Sure.
So,
Yeah. I mean, they're good at that. But
it's Baudrillard's farce becomes history. There. I guess the main thing that jumped out at me here.
Good PR only lasts 2 years. That's the rule.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So there's an intervention into future Marxian state debates between people like Kautsky, and this even has some pressure on the later Engels. Engels always recognized that the parliament was part of the state power. Duh, fucking obviously. But there's a notion that the state is really just a special body of armed men. So something like a parliamentary body. Is that really the state? Yes, it is. Marx says.
That was a way to try to sneak the Lassallean position back in without saying you were doing it. Partly because Lassalle himself saw the parliament as an annoyance, and that's why he was always writing Bismarck letters. And so there's some real thing there. But it's interesting because none of that's happened yet you can totally see Marx like glomming on to where this is going to go in Germany by what's happening in France. Germany's not even a thing yet, but you still see it.
Germany is not even a thing. Okay, let's.
I love that. There's a line in here I wanted to discuss because I love it, but I'm not entirely clear on it. It's just after he talks about the Party of Order getting into a majority in the National Assembly, where he says, "Here the deputies and the peers of Louis Philippe encountered a hallowed host of legitimists, for whom many of the nation's ballots have become transformed into admission cards to the political stage." So is he saying there that essentially the way the votes went in the election, the legitimists were given a degree of political power and representation via representative democracy that they had not possessed up until that point?
Yeah, that's the irony is like vote for me and never have to vote again. But that's what's there.
And it's contrasted with and the Bonapartists have spread too sparsely to be able to even form an independent parliamentary party, and they're existing as this evil appendage, which kind of it's almost like the way the Brexit Party never really had kind of formal representation in power, but exerted this kind of influence on the Tory party as this kind of evil appendage that didn't quite have kind of formal representation. It's so difficult for me to read so much of this without kind of overlaying what's going on in the UK.
Or the Trumpist faction of the Republicans versus the Republicans overall. I mean, it just see this over and over.
It's crazy. Yeah.
The tail's wagging the dog.
Yeah.
Yeah. Big time. It's like, I suppose it just works as a kind of like a, what do they call them? What do they call them in truck groups? Form a, what do they say? You can't form
Entryists.
No, you
faction?
can't form. Is it a faction? Is it a faction?
Yeah.
Is it just faction? Is there another word? There's another word.
Tendency?
There's another word too, though, isn't there?
There's a tendency, and trots don't ban tendencies. Trots often are tendencies. That's what they do.
That is another word I'm looking for. I can't fucking.
Not tendency, not faction, not
synergy. Sorry.
Group of bastards. That's the one I'm looking for.
Seclet, groupuscule. There's a lot that you use in post-trot speak to damn other small groups of things.
I tell you what, I wasn't thinking of a ginger group. That's for sure.
Stacked. Yeah, stacked. You mean stacked?
You mean
I don't know.
Cult light diet.
Fuck.
Cult.
Oh, leave me alone. I'll think of it in a while.
Diet cult.
Diet cult.
We're not a cult. We're a diet cult. Jeez.
There's a current. There's all kinds of things you can call a microfaction. So you know what's interesting? That it does seem like that how this works. Going back over that chapter is like the right formed a united front.
Correct.
I mean, seriously.
Yeah, it did.
It dealt with its prime enemy, and then it dealt with its other enemy, and then it dealt with itself.
Self negates.
Yeah.
In the same way that, the reactionaries cheer on revolutions because it slaughters all the revolutionaries. And this does appear as a sort of like, I don't know, Benny Hill theme, like, political meltdown. Of course, it ends in the reign of Louis Bonaparte, but he doesn't really come out smelling like roses, more like grape shot.
Yeah. It's so eerie reading this after having, like a year ago rereading De Maistre. And like
Yes.
De Maistre saying all this was going to happen. It was just like, oh.
Yeah, that's the weirdest thing about De Maistre is that he's like, he's a restorationist, right? He's a bourbon restorationist.
Right, but it's just like, yeah, all this is going to fall apart, and it's going to do this, and this, and this is going to happen, because, like, these revolutionaries are going to kill each other, and there's not going to be anything left. I was just like, whoo. Anyway.
Derek, do you want to take this?
Yeah.
Okay.
The shipwrecked pure Republicans found that they had melted down to a clique of about 50 men in the Legislative National Assembly. The African generals, oh my God.
Cavaignac. Just say
Cavaignac, Lacmore, and Bedou. I don't know.
Ciel and Bedou.
All right. Insert what Kyle said for any French word. All right.
We gotta get Kyle reading the frog paragraphs.
The great opposition.
What is it about Americans that think like particularly French words are like laughable and you should sneer at them? Like there's something. It's kind of weird. It's like an English
freedom price. Freedom price. Freedom price.
They don't love their freedom over there.
You know what? Actually, it is for me. I don't find French words laughable. I just find it really confusing how their Frankish pronunciation patterns really altered Latin, because it's not hard for me to say other Latin languages in the way it's hard for me to say French.
Okay, that accounts for why I'm bad at it, but why I giggle about it and don't learn that much is because in American leftist culture, your familiarity with French and liberal culture too is a sort of like middle class show of, how civilized and worldly you are.
Yeah.
And that's really where my resentment comes from. It's not against any, actual French people or French listeners. Do we have a lot of French listeners? I imagine they don't stick around.
No, like French radical theory is actually a class demarcator for a certain kind of bureaucrat, to be fair.
No, it totally is.
And it has been for a long time, even before like radical theory, like so. I've read Montesquieu.
All I'm saying is I'm glad there's no Irish theory because you fuckers wouldn't have a chance. And the other thing is like it's weird because like English people do the same thing to Irish names and Welsh names, don't they, James? They just make
it's the strange juxtaposition of consonants, I think, that is inherently amusing on when you cross the border and see the road signs and you're like, what?
Yeah.
Hey, at least this is empire mocking empire, okay?
All right. Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing about when we really talk about it. Like I've always said that Americans and French people hate each other because we're actually rudely alike. We're both of the Enlightenment tradition, and we're both very pissy about it. And our nations really come from those notions, and we really owe each other our existence to each other, but we can't admit it. So everything's like bad faith denial. They're like the brothers we don't want to admit we have.
Narcissism of minor differences.
Yeah.
All right, I'll stop calling it freedom kissing. Fine.
I won't.
All right. The Great Opposition Party, however, was formed by the Montagne. The Social Democratic Party had given itself this parliamentary baptismal name. Oh my God. Okay, that's funny. It commanded more than 200 of the 750 votes of the National Assembly. It was consequently at least as powerful as any one of the three factions of the Party of Order taken by itself. Its numerical inferiority compared with the entire Royalist coalition seemed to be compensated by special circumstances. Not only did the elections in the department show that it had gained considerable following among the rural populations, it counted in its ranks almost all deputies from Paris, The army had made the confession of a democratic faith by the election of 3 non-commissioned officers, and the leader of the Montagne, Ledru Roland, in contradistinction to all representatives of the Party of Order, had been raised to the parliamentary peerage by 5 departments, which had pooled their votes for him. In view of the inevitable clashes with the royalists among themselves and of the whole Party of Order with Bonaparte, the Montagne thus seemed to have all elements of success before it on May 28th, 1849. A fortnight later, it had lost everything, honor included. Oh my God, Bernie Sanders and Corbyn once again.
Less so Corbyn, I feel. Because like Corbyn didn't fold, he just got defeated. But Bernie's just kind of folded and then just fucking handed over the family.
Defeated, though.
He got defeated, but he then handed them the family silver. You know, he could have done anything. He could have ran differently and said, "Fuck it, I'm going to burn the party down." He could have done all those things. And what did he do? Right. He just handed him the silver. Where Corbyn couldn't say, "I'm going to run as an independent party," because it would never have happened. The same thing.
What's sad about this is that when I say the Corbyn, like this position you get in, though, this happens all the time where you're in a minority position, you're structured therein, you have a strong leadership, and there's going to be internal factions that you can't navigate that pull you apart. And that happens. I mean, that happened in 1914. That happened. Frankly, it happened in Russia. It's just one side had a military superiority of the other. I mean, like it's. You just see this over and over and over again.
And I think it's interesting in terms of how the way that Sanders, you know, I don't know if you can say he got screwed or whatever by the Democratic establishment, but with what we've seen published in that Labour Leaks report, the amount of factional, you know, the worst fever dreams of kind of a momentum member about what was going on in terms of the actual bureaucratic structure of the Labour Party has been completely confirmed by that document that was leaked. And so, although Tom's right, I think Corbyn, you know, did get defeated at the ballot box, there was even within the Corbyn context this kind of structural factional opposition going on within the party that certainly in the 2017 election potentially affected the outcome.
Yeah, I don't know. If getting elected is your strategy, you can't say being outmaneuvered is being screwed, because that's what happened. I mean, it was really naked political class, kind of like, oh no, we can't allow this to happen to our party.
It's politics. They got politically defeated.
Yeah, they're politically defeated. This is, you know, part of why people are skeptical of that kind of strategy of winning, like a socialist of any stripe winning in the Democratic Party. Like,
well, particularly from the executive, though, because like, unlike this is where this is another thing where the difference between Corbyn and Bernie is actually pretty illustrative. Corbyn had to have a pretty strong faction to ever, like within his own party, to ever get in the situation he was in.
He had no faction, Derek. The faction was like 7 people. It was literally, they just felt sorry for him, that they should put up at least one leftist. And then, holy shit, everybody started voting for him. There was nobody in the left of the Labour Party. James, tell me, James, am I right about that? How many was there?
Sorry, repeat that. I was just giving Nina a good night kiss.
Sorry. How many was in Corbyn's faction in the Labour Party? Was there 5? Was there 10?
10 at the most. I think that you could, if you take the 2016 chicken coup in terms of the MPs that voted against him or voted to move to another leadership election, there were about 40 that. So you could loosely say there were 40 that were loosely supported, but to be properly loyal to him, probably just under 10, I'd say.
You know, of a parliamentary party of, at the time, would have been
250.
250. So his faction was like literally probably about 10. So
and with the entire internal bureaucracy kind of like nakedly against him is kind of extraordinary.
So actually not that different from Sanders, except slightly less of
I'd say
slightly less of a folder.
I'd say probably about the same. Both of them. Like how many Democrats in the House of Congress, the House of Representatives actually were Sanders loyalists?
AOC was like even hesitant herself to like really back him.
Seriously,
and in the moments of crisis, 2.
Yeah, so that just shows you, like tell you, I only found out like about 2 weeks ago that AOC interned for, was it Ted Kennedy
I've never trusted AOC.
Seriously. So
No, she's a fucking. She's.
once I heard that, she's definitely going to betray everybody for power. She's
Betrayal
definitely
is too strong a word. Like she's not like she had good marketing. She got the right to like, you know, thirst hate on her on, you know, Twitter, or your Twitter staff, you know, got like really amped up this like campaign that like, you know, basically did to the right what the alt-right usually does to the left, right? Like evoke a certain kind of like, oh, I'm furious at you kind of response.
I'd say, I guarantee it, she will go the way of Obama. Within 10 years, she will be in. You will not be able to tell the difference between her and a normal Democrat,
except for the word socialism.
Yeah, she's already
literally a word.
She's just claimed that too. She's not. She has never repaid the DSA any of its. You know, I mean, you know, any of its later, you know, flipping for her. Doesn't mention it. Never helped it. So I mean, I bring that up because like one of the things about AOC that we're gonna have to contend with is, to be fair, if she doesn't do that, she's totally screwed because she's being redistricted. And that was already going to happen. So if she didn't capitulate some to the center of the Democratic Party, there was going to be no way they were going to support her to keep her House seat when her current constituent base was about to be completely diluted by redistricting in New York. That was going to happen even from moment one. So like it's like a game theoretic problem that you're going to see that. And one of the things that woe be it unto me to bring in bourgeois game theory when we're talking about the Brumaire, but one of the things I'm starting to think is like, dude, these choices are bounded and they show up over and over and over again, and it's like math almost. It's kind of
no, it's like when you set the rules of the game, it's fucking math.
Well, yeah, there's that. I mean, I think none of us here is like pointing to like a moral, you know, like a moral failing of AOC as to why this is happening. Like a fucking course she would have to capitulate to keep her seat. Like, I think no one's surprised by that.
No, I would go further. I would say that somebody who interns for Ted Kennedy and then just turns up on the radical left of the DSA and trendy when Bernie Sanders is trending and gets and is really media trained and all that and comes through and then starts moving to the right. Look, I think she's going to the right anytime. I can't imagine a socialist going to say, do you know who I'd want to go in and intern with? I don't want to fucking learn about fucking Marx or anything. I want to go to Ted fucking Kennedy. Give us a break.
Like,
come on now.
Yeah, but I think like if somebody interned for Ted Kennedy and then, you know, I don't know. When I was growing up, there was like a special on Fox where a magician was telling all the secrets of the trade. You know what I mean? Like if someone came from that background and had that attitude towards it and was like scathing and about, you know, the Democrats and like, you know, didn't like echo their talking points and was, you know, trying to treat Sanders as, you know, really like the new figurehead of a tendency or something and trying to echo that and cultivate other candidates and work with the DSA. Honestly, like if you're, you know, the way the Sanders campaign and the DSA cooperated, like I don't know to what extent that actually is. I'm sure it was kind of like a one-way street, but I think there was formal cooperation. DSAers out there, please correct me if I'm lying.
Bernie Sanders was formerly a member of the DSA at one point, though, in which you cannot, you know, and I guess AOC may have been at 1.2. I don't know. I actually haven't checked that. But one of the things that I just want to like bring up, I am actually, I don't think it's just moral here. I mean, whatever you think about that, that might be there too, but there's just, it's a bound game. One of the most insightful things I learned about AOC that again reminds me of this is when AOC didn't back anyone to dethrone Pelosi because most of the contenders with power were more right wing than Pelosi was. So there was literally no option except for the four freshman senators that come from very specific districts.
Yeah, I remember sassing her for this, and then I think it was even you, Derek, who said like, "Well, she said everyone, else who was you could choose besides Pelosi was worse," and so, she probably is a fucking political shrew,
Whatever. Like block up your 4 people and threaten a boycott if you don't get.
Here's the thing, but like when you say brown people, Ezra, you got to be more specific. It's actually not just brown people. It's brown.
I didn't say brown people. What, you can't tell us apart?
No, it's or whoever said that. It's a very specific.
Who's the racist? Who's the racist on this show?
I don't think anyone said anything about brown people.
Somebody did.
Really?
Yeah.
No, I think she said round up. I think she said round up.
Oh,
round people.
Yeah, round up your 4 people.
Your 4 freshman senators are all of color, but they're all specifically of. They're not.
Congress people.
Congress people.
Because we're talking about the House, right?
Yeah, they're all of color. They're all women, but they're not actually from the normal Democratic black demographic, because most of them are, I think, two of them are Muslims. So that's actually, they're not actually in the machine power of the Democratic Party, including the Black Congressional Caucus, and so there's a whole lot of like they're hyper alienated from the rest of the party. And they have their own concerns that are not always with Bernie Sanders. And if you don't like Ilhan Omar complicates things a lot.
Yeah, Omar has more autonomy than AOC.
And she's more I would put my money on she would be a better candidate if the left was to do it in 4 years' time and go for this Bernie Part 3. Someone like Ilhan Omar would be a lot fucking better. She's better on foreign policy. She doesn't strike me as
foreign policy, as long as you're not talking about Saudi Arabia or Turkey.
I haven't seen that bit though, in fairness. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, we can get into an extensive
let's
talk about this, but needless to say, this reminds us of now.
Yeah. Okay, this is not the AOC podcast. You're looking for a different one. If you hear all 21 people, if I say that, might go down to only 20. There's bound to be one AOC thirst spot here. Okay.
We're punching the Leninists. We're punching the Social Democrats. Who's left? Thanks. Like, comment, subscribe. Thank you for your
okay. James, how do you feel about reading this paragraph? Can you see it there?
Yeah, sure. Before we pursue parliamentary history further, some remarks are necessary to avoid common misconceptions regarding the whole character of the epoch that lies before us. Looked at with the eyes of Democrats, the period of the Legislative National Assembly is concerned with what the period of the Constituent Assembly was concerned with: the simple struggle between Republicans and Royalists. The movement itself, however, they sum up in the one shibboleth: reaction. Night in which all cats are grey, and which permits them to reel off their night watchman's commonplaces. And to be sure, at first sight, the Party of Order reveals a maze of different royalist factions, which not only intrigue against each other, each seeking to elevate its own pretender to the throne and exclude the pretender of the opposing faction, but also all unite in common hatred of and common onslaughts on the Republic. In opposition to this royalist conspiracy, the Montagne, for its part, appears as the representative of the Republic. The Party of Order appears to be perpetually engaged in a reaction, directed against press, association, and the like, neither more nor less than in Prussia, and as in Prussia, carried out in the form of brutal police intervention by the bureaucracy, the gendarmerie, and the law courts. The Montagne, for its part, is just as continually occupied in the warding off of these attacks, and thus defending the eternal rights of man, as every so-called People's Party has done, more or less, for a century and a half. If one looks at the situation and the parties more closely, however, this superficial appearance, which veils the class struggle and the peculiar physiognomy of the period, disappears. Shall I keep going?
Yeah, let's keep going.
Okay. Right. Legitimus, that's a banger of a paragraph, by the way. Legitimus and Orleanists, as we have said, formed the two great factions of the Party of Order. Was what held these factions fast to their pretenders and kept them apart from each other nothing but fleur-de-lis and tricolore, House of Bourbon and House of Orleans, different shades of royalism? Was it all the confession of faith of royalism? Under the Bourbons, big landed property had governed, with its priests and lackeys. Under Orleans, high finance, large-scale industry, large-scale trade, that is, capital, with its retinue of lawyers, professors, and smooth-tongued orators. The legitimate monarchy was merely the political expression of the hereditary rule of the lords of the soil, as the July monarchy was only the political expression of the usurped rule of the bourgeois parvenus. What kept the two factions apart, therefore, was not any so-called principles. It was their material conditions of existence, two different kinds of property. It was the old contrast between town and country, the rivalry between capital and landed property, that at the same time old memories, personal enmities, fears and hopes, prejudices and illusions, sympathies and antipathies, convictions, articles of faith and principles bound them to one or the other royal house. Who denies this? Upon the different forms of property, upon the social conditions of existence, rises an entire superstructure of distinct and peculiarly formed sentiments, illusions, modes of thought, and views of life. The entire class creates and forms them out of its material foundations and out of the corresponding social relations. The single individual, who derives them through tradition and upbringing, may imagine that they form the real motives and the starting point of his activity, while each faction, Orleanists and Legitimists, sought to make itself and others believe that it was loyalty to the two royal houses which separated them. Facts later proved that it was rather their divided interests which forbade the uniting of the two royal houses. And as in private life, one differentiates between what a man thinks and says of himself and what he really is and does, so in historical struggles, one must distinguish still more the phrases and fancies of parties from their real organism and their real interests, their conception of themselves from their reality. Orleanists and Legitimists found themselves side by side in the Republic with equal claims. If each side wished to effect the restoration of its own royal house against the other, that merely signified that each of the two great interests into which the bourgeoisie is split, landed property and capital, sought to restore its own supremacy and the subordination of the other. We speak of two interests of the bourgeoisie, for large landed property, despite its feudal coquetry and pride of race, has been rendered thoroughly bourgeois by the development of modern society. Thus, the Tories in England long imagined that they were enthusiastic about monarchy, the church, and the beauties of the old English constitution, until the day of danger wrung from them the confession that they are enthusiastic only about ground rent.
Dun, dun, dun.
What else can you say? It's the whole 9 yards.
Drop the mic.
Everybody wants to get in here. Everyone wants to get in. One at a time. Who's in first?
This is true. Last time when we were talking about, I think Marx said content and didn't say class content. And I felt like he was going to fill in the blanks in what he meant by content at some point. This is what like a theory of class interests means. This is where some of the epiphenomenal like ideas can be instrumentalized, kind of stuff comes in historical materialism. Now, people really object to the idea that everything, all ideas are determined by economic interests. And I think for good reason, because, you know, people don't really always work that way. But what's most important is what sort of determines, what determines the limits of your thought, what binds your thought, what interests, you know, narrow your horizons in a certain way. And Marx will eventually argue against a specific reading of the Petty-bourgeois in a narrow class interest way. And it's a more sophisticated idea of class interest than what you might expect just doing sociology.
Yeah, there's some really great stuff in here. I like this whole idea about people not being aware of their own actual motives. That's an interesting concept. What do people think about that?
I think that's true. I mean, like,
Absolutely.
Does Marx say that they're not, that they don't know, like, deep down? Because where does he say that?
talks about how like the royalists are brought up in these traditions of monarchism, and they see that as being legitimate for themselves, but then that's not really what's motivating them in this conflict.
Yeah, the single individual who derives them through tradition and upbringing may imagine that they form the real motives and the starting point of his activity.
Yeah, while each faction, Orleanists or Legitimists, sought to make itself and the other believe it was loyalty to the two royal houses which separated them, facts later proved it was rather their divided interests which forbade them from uniting the two royal houses. I mean, so, you know, Marx here is really good at pointing out that, like, we don't always even recognize our material interests, but we act on them anyway.
Okay, this is out of step with a sort of distinction that I normally see between Marx and Engels, where Marx usually will talk about epistemic limits, but he's less likely to impute something like false consciousness, where someone is sort of psychologically like unaware. But I guess he's not
positing that. Like,
no.
He doesn't explain the mechanism at all. He just says, like, look,
that's a good point.
Like, whatever you say you're doing, when you actually look at what your actions do and where your interests are, your interest and your actions line up more than what you believe as an individual.
Okay, so this is more of a behaviorist description.
Right.
Than like a theory of mind that Engels gets into.
No,
okay.
Yeah. I mean, like, one of the things I get mad at all the time, you've heard me say this for like, 10 years, that like Marx is really vague on what his theory of mind is, and Engels tries to spell one out, but it's not actually spelled out in Marx at all.
And I think it's important in this context to like remember the sorts of allegations that are slung between the two royalist factions, right? Like with the Legitimists saying that Louis Philippe was plotting to overthrow the Bourbon dynasty basically his whole life. And that like conspiracy theory is something that still sort of sticks around in the historiography to this day. Like, you know, there's a section in the Revolutions podcast where Mike Duncan kind of like goes into that whole theory and weighs in on what he thinks Louis Philippe's motivations were, because it's such a contentious issue. So for these people who were of either house or adherents of either house, they were very passionate about these claims of legitimacy. It wasn't purely instrumental in their minds, at least.
No, that's all good clarifying points.
Like it always reminds me of like when I meet somebody and I say I'm Irish and they say, "Oh, are you from Northern Ireland or Southern Ireland?" And I go, "Oh, I'm from Southern Ireland." And they go, "Are you?" Oh, they go, "Isn't it terrible what happened up north with the Catholics fighting the Protestants?" And I always say to them, "Look, none of them know the differences between transubstantiation and consubstantiation.
Right,
It's nothing to do with religion. It's got literally nothing to do with religion, even if that's the form of what it takes."
Yeah.
But there's another bit here as well that I particularly like, when he talks about, you know, how in the end, when it comes to the crunch, people act upon their material interests that they may have self-denied or not been aware of all along. It kind of always reminds me of, like, you know, you're watching some kind of mafia film or something, and like there's a mafia boss and his right-hand man is super loyal to him all the way. And then at a certain time, he goes too far in like some kind of like a war, and the guy thinks, "Oh, well, you know, I got to change sides. I got to preserve like business." And he goes over to like his enemy of his entire life. And then he just goes over, and then they double cross the guy and away they go. And you find that the loyalty was nothing. It was literally all about the money. And, you know, yeah, it just reminded me of like, I don't know what actual film. Is there a Godfather where that happens? I don't think there is, but it's like maybe Godfather 1 a bit. But, you know, I just think, you know, it's all based on the money in the end of the day. You know, what are the material interests of these people?
The other bit of historical context I was interested in is, you know, where he references neither more nor less than in Prussia, and as in Prussia carried out in the form of brutal police intervention by the bureaucracy, the gendarmerie and the law court, what is the context there? What was going on in Prussia that he needed to kind of give reference to that?
That was the guy. Who was the guy in Russia? Bismarck. And Bismarck.
It is Bismarck, and the Prussian begins the Prussian autocracy, which leads to the Second Reich.
Right. Okay.
So like that is the and what eats up like the Principate quasi state of Metternich is Prussian autocracy, like squeezing down on that and then expanding out, and you like because how Germany gets unified.
Derek.
Mm-hmm.
Derek, are you scratching something on your desk or a can or something because it's coming across in the audio quite a bit from you? There's a scratchiness. I don't know if you're.
Nope.
Okay, or maybe is your mic on your jumper moving or something like that?
Maybe. Let me get that. There we go. Okay. So.
It's worse now.
Really?
Yeah. Is anybody else hearing it? Or is it just me?
No, I
I
hear
hear
it.
a little scratchy.
Is everyone else muted besides Derek? Because it could be someone else.
Yeah. Well, I'm muted.
I've definitely been looking. It's definitely Derek's end, but I don't know, Derek. Have you got like gain turned up really high or something weird?
No.
Or maybe just check your inputs or something. Anyway,
Yeah.
tech support session. I guess before Derek finishes his thought, I wanted to I don't know. There's a revealed preferences theory of class interest here, and revealed preferences normally thought of as a right-wing methodological thing, through game theory and whatever. But it's actually pretty useful. You watch somebody's feet instead of listening to their gums flap. That's all.
I always find there's a great opening. Has anybody watched Boardwalk Empire? It opens in a scene where the main protagonist, what you call the guy, the Italian guy with the weird teeth?
Buscemi?
Buscemi. Steve Buscemi is like the local kind of Don who's the head gangster in, I think it's Atlantic City. And he's the one who's running all the booze during the Prohibition. And there he is on the stage. He's waiting to give a speech, and he gets up, and it's in front of the Temperance Society, and he's talking about the evils of booze. I always thought that was like a great explanation of what people do cynically in politics. But you got to look at actually not what they say, but actually look at what they actually do in reality.
Yeah.
I think that's fucking. Everything that can be, you can explain everything by looking at people's actions and ignoring their words. Just literally don't listen to a word people say and just look at their actions.
Right. So I was wrong about where we're at. Bismarck becomes a politician in 1849, so it's concurrent to this, and Marx would have been writing shortly after it. But here's what was actually going on. So what you had was a crackdown through the king. Which king are we at? Oh, Frederick Wilhelm IV promised to merge Prussia with Germany, and he got. He got assailed by the press or whatever, and then 1848 breaks out. Then Frederick Wilhelm unilaterally imposes a monarchist constitution in December 5th, and the Berlin Assembly is dissolved, and it's replaced with a bicameral legislature, and they start a pretty heavy crackdown, and they cooperate under the old Metternich rules and start suppressing the press and whatnot, and censoring and all that. Bismarck comes in under that bicameral legislature, but he's not important yet. And I was rushing like I tend to do.
Was he not? I think he was an advisor before that. Was he not?
I think he was an advisor, yeah, but he wasn't the main guy until later on.
Yeah, so I just wanted to get because I have this I have this tendency to compress everything from 1848 to 1870 in my head. So like,
I feel you. Shout outs to
It's-
Jar Handala for fix for that correction, and also for the correction that AOC is part of the SA to this day and was when she ran. So that's this is gonna be a fun episode to edit. So thanks.
Derek, are you a sufferer from 19th century compression?
yeah, apparently.
I mean, I can't blame you because like 1848 to 1870 is like some of the most important years for like very little changes from like a revolutionary left perspective.
Yeah,
a lot of shit happens, nothing changes.
yeah. The workers' movement has a lull in Marx's Marx's sort of speech from the First International. You know, since the crushing of 1848, there's really like not much going on.
Happens until the Labour Party start to coalesce around the United Union movements in 1875. Yeah. So, like, I mean, but all the unification of the nation states happen, and like the Habsburgs get there. I mean, a lot happens.
A lot does happen, but for the left, not a lot happens.
On AOC,
yeah.
Oh, so AOC is still technically part of the Democratic Socialists, even though she didn't get their endorsement of her chapter originally. Like, I didn't know that because I know she didn't actually get that endorsement. That was a big deal, and she doesn't.
Okay, I mean that's what Jar Handala says in the chat.
Well, Ezra, didn't you post an article that corroborates that as well?
That's
from 2018 when I think she was running.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But I mean, I don't know. I didn't know that if she was still. Like I said, when I said I didn't know if she was ever really a member, but I guess she was. I know she saw their endorsement and didn't get it, and then got it later, de facto-y. But she was also, you know, like, it's really not. That's not really super important. I just wanted why I was confused. The other reason why I'm confused is believe it or not, membership of in the Democratic Socialist is not public, and the only way you can find it out is from KeyWiki. So,
yeah.
Oof.
Okay, I'm going to read this bad boy. Let's move it on. Now we're going to talk it up here about... Fuck it. I can't even remember what it is. Let's just start. Only I read it about an hour ago. Right. Let's do it. Okay. The Royalists in coalition carried on their intrigues against one another in the press, in Ems, in Claremont, outside Parliament. Behind the scenes, they donned their old Orleanist and Legitimist liveries again, and once more engaged in their old tourneys. But on the public stage, in their grand performances of state, as a great parliamentary party, they put off their respective royal houses with mere obeisances and adjourn the restoration of the monarchy in infinitum. They do their real business as the party of order, that is, under a social, not under a political title, as representatives of the bourgeoisie world order, not as knights of errant princesses, as the bourgeois class against other classes, not as royalists against the republicans. And as the party of order, they exercise more unrestricted and sterner domination over the other classes of society than ever previously under the Restoration or under the July monarchy, a domination which, in general, was possible only under the form of the parliamentary republic. For only under this form could the two great divisions of the French bourgeoisie unite, and thus put the rule of their class, instead of the regime of a privileged faction of it, on the order of the day. If they nevertheless, as party of order, also insulted the Republic and expressed their repugnance to it, this happened not merely from royalist memories. Instinct taught them that the Republic, true enough, makes their political rule complete, but at the same time undermines its social foundation, since they must now confront the subjugated classes and contend against them without mediation, without the concealment afforded by the crown, without being able to divert the national interest by their subordinate struggles amongst themselves and with the monarchy. It was a feeling of weakness that caused them to recoil from the pure conditions of their own class rule, and to yearn for the former, more incomplete, more underdeveloped, and precisely on that account, less dangerous forms of this rule. On the other hand, every time the royalists in coalition come in conflict with the pretender who confronts them, with Bonaparte, every time they believe their parliamentary omnipotence endangered by the executive power, every time, therefore, that they must produce their political title to their rule, they come forward as republicans and not as royalists. From the Orleanist Thiers, who warns the National Assembly that the Republic divides them least, to the legitimist Berryer, who on the December the 2nd, 1851, as a tribune swathed in a tricoloured sash, harangues the people assembled before the town hall of the 10th arrondissement in the name of the Republic. To be sure, a mocking hero calls back to him, Henry V, Henry V.
Oh, so good. So good.
Right.
So I looked up that reference to Henry V to clarify exactly what it means. And of course, Henry V was a, extremely successful commander in the war against the French. But his victories were completely Pyrrhic, because even though he was successfully nominated as heir to the French throne, he died inopportunely and was never able to actually inherit it. And of course, England never did conquer France.
Is there anything in here anybody wants to pick apart?
It's almost too much.
Yeah, so I liked what about this bit here? Okay. About how they insulted the Republic. Okay. Instinct taught them that the Republic, true enough, makes their political rule complete, but at the same time undermines its social foundation, since they must now confront the subjugated classes and contend against them without mediation, without the concealment afforded by the crown, without being able to divert the national interest by their subordinate struggles among themselves and with the monarchy. So today, bourgeois parties don't seem too afraid of their, ruling politically on their own. Is it that they were just not used to the game?
I think we kind of see a substitute for this in the form of parliamentary proceduralism or gerrymandering or these kinds of obstructions of pure democracy that the bourgeoisie uses in republics. Even if they cannot resort to the parliamentary power. In contrast, somewhere like the UK, they very much do resort to monarchical symbols to deflect criticism of the regime as a whole.
So Marx is here showing his theory that democracy would actually cause, the proletarian social conflict to come to a head. And, at one point he thought the petty bourgeois Democrats could be an ally, That's one of the major changes between the Marx of the Manifesto and Marx after 1848.
Well, I mean, one of the major changes is he gets more and more anti-state over time.
Yeah.
But
I think we should look at this here as an example. Here we have.
This is the symbol that we were just gesturing to that Carl was mentioning.
Let's have a look.
Here's our sovereign symbol.
His room, his house is papered tartan. The wallpaper is fucking tartan.
So for context, this is at 8 p.m. once a week. The public go out and clap the NHS care workers, and so here we have. This is the best bit when they come out and they seem very uncertain of how to clap, what clapping is.
People have only ever clapped for them. They probably never clapped in their fucking
exactly.
lives.
Exactly. Clapping for others.
Oh,
is
yes.
foreign
God,
concept.
This is fun. Oh my god.
I've never seen someone clapping for others that were so clearly clapping for themselves for clapping for others.
Yeah.
Exactly. Precisely.
Yeah, it's as shambolic as Boris's mopping routine in the last election. But
I like that.
you know,
Yeah.
nevertheless, the regime persists. But yeah, I mean, you know, the Queen's address recently about the crisis is like a little bit less farcical example of that.
Well, I think the other thing that's interesting is particularly because when Johnson got ill, the press covered it in a kind of almost Hobbesian sense, the right-wing press at least, that in Johnson there was this totemic kind of sovereign figure, and all the hopes and fears of the nation were somehow tied up in whether or not he'd get better. It was extraordinary seeing the way that they were reporting this. It was really strange. So you could still see that the grip to which the psyche of certain sections of the British population perceive kind of sovereignty is it is monarchical, but it's also kind of vested within the vestige of the person of the prime minister. I don't know if you remember any of those headlines, Tom, but it was like really strange. There was like literally like on, because he came out of hospital, I think, on a Sunday, and it was like on the Sabbath he rises, all of this kind of stuff. It was really strange.
Have you guys ever seen what Americans do when a president dies?
Yeah.
Oh God. Or when a John McCain dies.
Yeah. Or with a significantly popular, even though not particularly effective senator dies, it's we get out all the affairs, the accoutrement bullshit. Royal state.
When Maggie Thatcher died, there were like parties all over Britain burning effigies.
That was not true when Reagan died.
No, it's not true when Reagan died. It was basically like a Kim Jong-il's funeral.
Yeah,
you know,
it really was.
It was years later. Years later, the cult of Reagan was still so powerful. You watch shows like Entertainment Tonight, and just, you know, the halo around Reagan was still very much visible. It was very creepy.
Okay. Yeah, one thing I was thinking as well here about that, it mightn't necessarily have been so much that they didn't know the parliamentary game so much, but like they still had, and like the Orleanists and the Legitimists, they had a contradiction that need to be resolved, you know, and like that contradiction doesn't exist today, so they don't have to play that same game. So it has been resolved for them in the Republic, and in the fall of the Republic, it's been solved for them. Does that make sense? Is that do people agree with that?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Sorry.
Okay, sorry. No, yeah. Okay, let's keep going then. All right, where are we now? Okay, who wants to take the next one? Sophie, do you want to do a read?
Sure. Highlight this shit.
Okay, let me highlight this motherfucker. This is a long one, Sophie. I hope you're loving it. Okay, any French words in here? There's only the Montagne, I think, in this one.
Okay, I can handle Montagne.
Yeah, there you go. Off you go. It's like Montana. You can just say Montana. It's like
howdy y'all.
Howdy y'all. Down here, Montana. I don't know what
literally means the same thing. So
yeah, it does.
Do you know what the Irish for a mountain is?
What's that?
Sleeve. It's kind of done. It doesn't sound like it at all, does it? There you go. Sorry, I just thought I'd say that.
Okay. As against the coalesced bourgeoisie, a coalition between petty bourgeoisie and workers had been formed, the so-called Social Democratic Party. Actually, I can't see because the StreamYard logo is right over that, but I think it says, the so-called Social Democratic Party. The petty bourgeois saw that they were badly rewarded after the June days of 1848, that their material interests were imperiled, and that the democratic guarantees which were to ensure the effectiveness of these interests were called into question by the counter-revolution.
Effectuation.
Oh, sorry. And that the democratic guarantees which were to ensure the effectuation of these interests were called into question by the counter-revolution. Accordingly, they came closer to the workers. On the other hand, their parliamentary representation, the Montagnier, thrust aside during the dictatorship of the bourgeois republicans, had in the last half of the life of the Constituent Assembly reconquered its lost popularity through the struggle with Bonaparte and the royalist ministers. It had concluded an alliance with the socialist leaders. In February 1849, banquets celebrated the reconciliation. A joint program drafted, joint election committees were set up, and joint candidates put forward. The revolutionary point was broken off, and a democratic turn given to the socialist point thrust forward. Thus arose social democracy.
You skipped a line.
Did I?
Sorry.
Jesus, I can't read.
With the revolutionary point, go from the revolutionary point, because both of them, they look similar to each other. The next line, yeah, it's easy done.
The revolutionary point was broken off and a democratic turn given to the social demands of the proletariat. The purely political form was stripped off, the democratic claims of the petty bourgeoisie and their socialist point thrust forward. Thus arose social democracy. The result of this combination contained, apart from some supernumeraries. Okay. Apart from some supernumeraries from the working class and some socialist sectarians, the same element as the old Montagne, but numerically stronger. However, in the course of development, it had changed with the class that it represented. The peculiar character of social democracy is epitomized in the fact that the democratic republican institutions are demanded as a means not of doing away with two extremes, capital and wage labor, but of weakening their antagonism and transforming it into harmony. However different the means proposed for the attainment of this end may be, however much it may be trimmed but with more or less revolutionary notions, the content remains the same. This content is the transformation of society in a democratic way, but a transformation within the bounds of the petty bourgeoisie. Only one must not get the narrow-minded notion that the petty bourgeoisie, on principle, wishes to enforce an egoistic class interest. Rather, it believes that the special conditions of its emancipation are the general conditions within whose frame alone modern society can be saved and their class struggle avoided. Just as little must one imagine that the democratic representatives are indeed all shopkeepers or enthusiastic champions of shopkeepers. According to their education and their individual position, they may be as far apart as heaven and earth. What makes them representative of the petty bourgeoisie is the fact that in their minds they do not get beyond the limits which the latter do not get beyond in life. That they are constantly driven theoretically to the same problems and solutions to which material interests and social position drive the latter practically. This is, in general, the relationship between the political and literary representatives of a class and the class they represent.
Right. Yeah. There is a goddamn lot here. Esri, pick it apart.
Well, starting from the bottom, this is the general relationship between political and literary representatives of a class and the class they represent. There's a certain theory of class interest that's being complicated because, the idea of class interest doesn't originate with Marx. And I guess it's especially, what's the word? It's usually imputed to Marx, right? This one-to-one, oh, you're petty bourgeois. That means you have a small-minded, you only care about your own little business. Actually, if you talk to like shopkeepers, small shopkeepers, they develop their whole worldview on like people like them getting a fair shot, even though they're really talking about people that are often their competition. Like there's I don't know, Marx is sophisticated about class interest. The Marxian notion of class interest is like the heart of his theory, I feel like the heart of what makes, Marx a valuable thinker. Why he could reflect on an event that, it's history to us, but what was this to him? Journalism? Polemic? Like, it was very contemporary.
Derek. Okay. So there's a lot going in here. Like James, when I'm reading I'm reading some of this stuff here where it talks about how let's have a look. Where does he say where they there's a bit here. Where he talks about, once you have like this kind of political idea of a social democratic thing, when you take the revolutionary point of the proletariat has already been broken off. He talks here about, the kind of coalition that's left. I really like this. Only one. He talks. The content is the transformation of society in a democratic way, but a transformation with the bounds of the petty bourgeoisie. Only one must not get the narrow-minded notion that the petty bourgeoisie, on principle, wishes to enforce an egoistic class interest. Rather, it believes that the special conditions of its emancipation are the general conditions with those which frame alone modern society, those conditions within whose frame alone modern society can be saved and the class struggle avoided. Like, my God, that is so apt for today. That's like all these people on Twitter with like a British flag and a European flag after it. It's all these like the worst form of liberals in the UK, that they don't see themselves as actually being in a class. They see themselves like as literally representing what is just the proper way to do things in society. Like a friend of mine who, he's went to college with me and similar, skilled laborer, I suppose you call him, maybe PMC. But like he says similar things to me, but he says, but like ideology is dead. You can't that's just like 20th century stuff. And you're like kind of going, like, do you see yourself as being outside of ideology? And I swear to God, I think the vast majority of this middle class, democratic, socialist, I think a lot of these people actually think they are outside of playing social class interest roles.
Class works best when you don't realize it's there.
Right.
That's like, I don't want to go all Tusseryan structural interpolation on people because I don't really believe that. But there is a way in which everybody who has class interests likes to believe that they are not acting off of the interest of things that are structural, and they are acting on their own immediate personal beliefs. And while there is no one-to-one determination, and I don't think Marx thinks that either, in aggregate, there definitely is. Like, I can't predict what an individual person is going to do according to their class interest, but I can definitely predict what groups of people are probably going to do according to their class interests.
Right. Stochastically, just sort of like, there's a pretty good chance.
Thermodynamics, baby. Thermodynamics.
But I think it's interesting that he says what makes them representatives of the petty bourgeoisie is the fact that in their minds, they do not get beyond the limits, which the latter do not get beyond in life, that they are constantly driven theoretically to the same problems and solutions to which material interest and social position drive the latter practically. So, this isn't entirely like a class essence thing either. Like, you can think and behave and theorize in this petty bourgeois mode without coming from that place. You know, your social position may be as different, and education, you know, maybe as different as heaven and earth. You know, both of these theories are there, like the structuralism and this sort of like, yeah, but that's kind of like not, you know, it's not really the only determinant. In the idea world, in the theory world, if you keep confronting the same things, and again, if we page up, this is about the peculiar character of social democracy, epitomized in the fact that democratic Republican institution are demands as a means of not doing away with the extremes of capital and wage labor, but of weakening their antagonism, transforming it into harmony. I mean, God, like a lot of very sophisticated Marxists end up in that category. Like they have all of the theory in the world, and it ends up feeding into that notion. Like, I mean, you know, you don't have to be from
Like Derek, just like Derek.
Oh yeah, yeah, yes. So that's what I was saying, of course. But you don't, you know, you don't have to be petty bourgeoisie to get there. You have to be petty bourgeois to get there. Like,
yeah, you can be a political or intellectual representative of the class.
Right.
And that, you know, like you can have someone like maybe Sanders is a good example of this, someone who's like kind of on the fringes of the petty bourgeoisie, not really petty bourgeois himself, but is absolutely in the mindset of the petty bourgeoisie.
One thing here, there's a line here where it says why the petty bourgeois ended up siding with the proletariat in the Social Democratic Party. What are these material interests that they were badly rewarded with after the June days in 1848 when the proles got their asses kicked? Anybody know what they kind of did, what they felt, how they felt they got shafted there? Anybody?
Well, like the government was like the Constitutional Assembly pretty much tried to shut them out. The Legislative Assembly did likewise. So yeah, like they just weren't in power. And yeah, I don't know what to say beyond that.
They weren't on the side of the proles though at that time. They didn't rise up.
No. They were first against the proles and then decided to ally with them. You know, once they realized that they weren't getting their piece of the pie.
Okay. Right. Will we do a next bit of a tranche here?
One other thing I was hoping to get some clarity on is when he mentions the socialist leaders, where he says that Bonaparte and the Royalists are allying with the socialist leaders. Who is he actually referring to there?
Paul
Like
LeBlanc.
Blanqui.
No, it's not referring to Blanqui. It's referring to Paul LeBlanc.
Oh, sorry.
And the workhouse socialists, the people who they actually are kind of who invented like a lot of our modern notions of social democracy.
Louis Blanc.
Yeah, not Paul Blanc, but yeah, my mind is rattled today. But like the Blanc is who he's referring to, and the workhouse socialism that emerged right before 1848. It only existed for like 2 months. Like it was, I think it was actually, they opened the workhouses.
They immediately tried to work against them. They put a guy who wanted to ditch them. They got a guy in. They did that trick in The Wire. Do you know when they get that like the new commanding officer in to close down the division? It's like, that's what they did. Instead of actually closing it down, they got a guy in to make life so fucking miserable. Everybody would just kind of leave and the thing would fall apart.
Well, and they also played proto-feminist against it too, because how they actually got it to eventually shut down was it was falling apart, and then they allowed women into it, and then like the popular sentiment went against it. So, yeah.
I worked in a bank in Ireland, and we were part of a research kind of a wing, an architecture wing, like an IT research and architecture wing. And the management basically wanted to shut it down, but they didn't want to actually have to deal with fucking shutting it down. So what they did is they sent in a wrecker, and this guy came in and he wrecked for a year and a half, and everybody left the department, and there was nobody left. It was amazing watching it. Literally, after about 6 months, people started leaving, and then by the time I left, there was nearly nobody left. There's about 5 people out of about 30. Everybody just went, "Oh yeah, he's like a wrecking ball. He's just going in there to do nothing and then annoy you." Classic management technique.
Wow. I didn't realize I came in like a wrecking ball was a strategy.
And sorry, Louis Blanc was also on the Constituent Assembly. Is that right?
Correct. He was the leader of the socialists, the left in the Constituent National Assembly.
Correct.
But they got shafted. They didn't get any representatives in the executive, so they were kind of kept out of power. The one thing they got in was the work, jobs for the boys. Work. What do they call them?
Workhouses, I think.
Well, they call them national workshops, is what they call them. But they were effectively like workhouses, but unlike the workhouses in England, they were actually like you got paid. They were. Yeah. It's the idea of making the state the employer of last resort.
It's MMT, job guarantee. Well, that thing only lasted like 25 years after the war. All the Western countries essentially had job guarantee, full employment possibilities or policies, and then they just got rid of them. It took them longer after World War II to get rid of them than it did after the Fourth French Revolution. I don't know how many revolutions is this. Is this 4?
There's a few, but right from the beginning, social democracy gets its pants pulled down, betrayed, and its efforts sabotaged and underfunded.
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
Seriously, the reason why we have the word communist is because Marx was hesitant to use the word socialist because Blanc lost. Blanc lost so bad. I keep on making him LeBlanc, but he comments on this in the communist or Engels comments on it in the Communist League reflections. Is like that's why they use the term and they're kind of interchangeable. But like the French socialists were, we wanted to differentiate ourselves from them because so many of them are petty bourgeois and kind of dumb. So
it was mentioned earlier in the discussion that in the manifesto, Marx suggested an alliance with the petty bourgeoisie. Is that contrary to what he's saying here in this text, where he's trashing the alliance of the petty bourgeoisie?
I think it comes from. This is written later.
Post. Yeah, this is the post. Well, this is was the other one. Was the Communist Manifesto not written before these revolutions?
It was written before these revolutions.
It was
before 1848.
Yeah, right before it. The other thing you got to remember is the Communist League, like half its membership were artisans, and like Engels and Marx weren't clear if they were petty bourgeois or not. Actually, so like that comes up in Engels' reflection. The Engels talks about they were artisan craftsmen, and so they had kind of petty bourgeois interest, but there was also proletarian in the movement. And so it wasn't just like a theoretical position. It was literally what the League of the Just and the Communist League were. Like they had members who were petty craftsmen in there. Right. But
they're sort of aware that, again, it's not like a class essence theory that determines all your ideas. You can as a Marx, as a lawyer's son or whatever, like you can
pudgy fail son, as Shane would call him. He's a pudgy fail son.
Right. Yeah. You can try to suss out the class interests of the proletariat and try to promote it. As skeptical as we all are of doing that to some degree, because of how it comes out, without the notion of class interests, this whole thing is like. It becomes farcical once you cut that cord.
Has Shane got the best slurs and curses of any of the people on the Emancipation Network?
I'm jealous, frankly.
Which is ironic because Shane is like the most sweetest, wholesome person. Also,
I don't know. He's got a very evil laugh. He's got the most evil laugh. What did you call somebody on one of the podcast there? A six-toed pony fucker. There was six-toed pony fucker.
What?
What was the other one? Oh man, there was just one there the other day as well. Yeah, pudgy fail sons. Rich pudgy fail sons of like rich financiers, pudgy fail sons, and six-toed pony fuckers. I like them too. He has a lot of them. Kyle, he's got to have some more than that.
They do.
They do.
They do. Yes.
Hey, sorry. Sorry.
I definitely appreciate Shane bringing the sass to our podcast. I think the Pudgy Failsuds thing may be a Chapo pull, but I think the six-toed pony fucker is an original. So, congrats to that.
Well, I mean, look, they like my Freudian metaphors for cybernetics, so I'm very pleased.
Okay, let's move it on. So, Kyle, you want to take this again?
All right. And I'm reading up to where?
So after this analysis, down to
broken. Got it.
Yeah.
All right. After this analysis, it is obvious that if the Montaigne continually contends with the party of order for the Republic and the so-called rights of man, neither the Republic nor the rights of man are its final end, any more than an army which one wants to deprive of its weapons and which resists has taken the field in order to maintain in possession of its own weapons. Immediately, as soon as the National Assembly met, the party of order provoked the Montaigne. The bourgeoisie now felt the necessity of making an end of the democratic petty-bourgeois, just as a year before it had realized the necessity of settling with the revolutionary proletariat. But the situation of adversity was different. The strength of the proletarian party lay in the streets, that of the petty bourgeois in the National Assembly itself. It was therefore a question of decoying them out of the National Assembly into the streets and causing them to smash their parliamentary power themselves before time and circumstances could consolidate it. The Montaigne rushed headlong into the trap. The bombardment of Rome by French troops was the bait that was thrown. It violated Article 5 of the Constitution, which forbids the French Republic to employ its military forces against the freedom of another people. In addition to this, Article 54 prohibited any declaration of war by the executive power without the assent of the National Assembly, and by its resolution of May 8th, the Constituent Assembly had disapproved of the Roman expedition. On these grounds, Louis Rollin brought in a bill of impeachment against Bonaparte and his ministers on June 11th, 1849. Exasperated by the wasp stings of Trier, he actually let himself be carried away to the point of threatening that he would defend the Constitution by every means, even with arms in hand. The Montaigne rose to a man and repeated this call to arms. On June 12th, the National Assembly rejected the bill of impeachment, and the Montaigne left the Parliament. The events of June 13 are known. The proclamation issued by a section of the Montaigne declaring Bonaparte and his ministers outside the Constitution. The street procession of the Democratic National Guard, who, unarmed as they were, dispersed on encountering the troops of Changarnier, etc., etc. A part of the Montaigne fled abroad. Another part was arraigned before the High Court at Bourges, and a parliamentary regulation subjected the remainder to the schoolmasterly surveillance of the President of the National Assembly. Paris was again declared in a state of siege, and the democratic part of its National Guard dissolved. Thus, the influence of the Montaigne in Parliament and the power of the petty bourgeois in Paris were broken.
Yeah, that's pretty devastating. Like, there's one thing I get from this. Like, I know we did the revolutionary strategy series before the last time, and there is, like, the picture I got from it was like some book of famous people playing chess, and it was actually it was Marx. There was like, they had some stuff of Marx actually playing. There's recorded chess games between Marx and other grandmasters at chess. I don't know if you know that. So you can actually, yeah, wow. You can actually play them, and he's really fucking good. And you can tell he's good. Wow. Yeah, because he's got strategy. And like he's like, you read this, no joking, I always come back to it, but like the reason why I like revolutionary strategy and the reason why I like this, a lot of it is, you know, I come from like a kind of game theory background, and it's obvious as hell what's going on here. To me, like, you know, you can look at a lot of this stuff that the modern left does, and you can just game theory it and show how utterly pathetic all of the standard lines are for most left parties are. Utterly pathetic.
It's bourgeois ideology, Tom. Don't think too hard about it.
Yeah, you can't do game theory. That's bad.
Yeah.
May I continue reading to the end of this defeat section, the like a pricked bubble section here, up to like a pricked bubble. Okay,
I have it here. Yeah.
So just so we get the whole thing in here. All right. So Lyon, where June 13 had given the signal for a bloody insurrection of the workers, was, along with the 5 surrounding departments, likewise declared in a state of siege, a condition that has continued up to the present moment. The bulk of the Montagne had left its vanguard in the lurch, having refused to subscribe to its proclamation. The press had deserted, only 2 journals having dared to publish the pronunciamento. The petty-bourgeois betrayed their representatives in that the National Guard either stayed away or, where they appeared, hindered the building of barricades. The representatives had duped the petty-bourgeois in that the alleged allies from the army were nowhere to be seen. Finally, instead of gaining an accession of strength from it, the Democratic Party had infected the proletariat with its own weakness, and, as usual with the great deeds of Democrats, the leaders had the satisfaction of being able to charge their people with desertion, and the people the satisfaction of being able to charge its leaders with humbugging it. Seldom had an action been announced with more noise than the impending campaign of the Montagne. Seldom had an event been trumpeted with greater certainty or longer in advance than the inevitable victory of the democracy. Most assuredly, the Democrats believe in the trumpets before whose blast the walls of Jericho fell down. And as often they stand before the ramparts of despotism, they seek to imitate the miracle. If the Montagne wished to triumph in Parliament, it should not have called to arms. If it called to arms in Parliament, it should not have acted in parliamentary fashion in the streets. If the peaceful demonstration was meant seriously, then it was folly not to foresee that it would be given a warlike reception. If a real struggle was intended, then it was a queer idea to lay down the weapons with which it would have to be waged. But the revolutionary threats of the petty bourgeois and their democratic representatives are mere attempts to intimidate the antagonist. And when they have run into a blind alley, when they have sufficiently compromised themselves to make it necessary to activate their threats, then this is done in an ambiguous fashion that avoids nothing so much as the means to the end and tries to find excuses for succumbing. The blaring overture that announced the contest dies away in a pusillanimous snarl as soon as the struggle has to begin. The actors cease to take themselves au sérieux, and the action collapses completely like a pricked bubble. The burns continue in the next paragraph, but let's maybe discuss this part.
Yeah, like I really like at the start of the previous big long section we did, there's a bit where he talks about how for some people, for pure Republicans, the Parliament itself was what they were trying to defend, but not for the Montagne. They were really trying to use the mountain, they thought they were trying to use it as a weapon for social democracy or socialism. Right. Which is, I think that's a quite a big difference. But they fell so headlong into a trap from a position of quite amount of power. It's kind of, shocking.
And isn't this always the case with the Social Democrats, that a portion of their power lies in the streets, a portion of their power lies in the parliament, but they never sum up to being more than just 2 separate powers, and often the parliament ends up suppressing the street power.
Always.
No. You see, the real road to power is in the parliament. The streets, they're just going to get in the way. Trust us. We got this. Hey, you're fucking up our victory.
That's always the way, isn't it? Isn't it like that? It's like there's a strict delineation there. It seems like that, any of the actual achievements as well, to make it worse, any of the achievements of these social democratic forums are usually based on the fear of a third class, which is a radical class. Is that true? Can somebody name
Generally,
times
yeah.
in?
Generally, that's what happens. The more radicalized proletarian class is scaring the social democrats into making reforms scaring a faction in the parliament to side with the social democrats to make the reforms possible, as well as some of the more conservative social democrats. I'm going to try to be fair in my historical broad generalizations, but that is to be what normally happens.
Yeah, this is kind of the angle from which I'm skeptical of McNair's from our last series in Revolutionary Strategy, his critique of Luxembourg and his endorsement of a Kautskian argument that goes something like this. If you have a mass strike, right, you can only hold out for like a few days, or even if you hold out for a long time, make the economy scream. There's not really like a mechanism for transitioning to a new
Social order. A new.
I would say
social
social order. I was like order.
Yeah.
The word is
Well,
order,
party-
and
new
I'm like,
party of order.
The thing that's difficult that he's claiming is
Yeah.
that it's difficult to go from mass strike to smashing the state, basically.
And it's a good point, but very frequently, what you get in the history that he's drawing lessons out of, okay, I could see the logic of this, but frequently in history, the people like the party doesn't want to, lead this transition out in this revolutionary fashion and in line with what the proletariat is ready to do. It's sort of got its own calculus. And now I guess this isn't true universally, but very frequently it takes a social democratic route instead. This sort of we would know it from Reformism and Bernstein and whatever, Marxists working their way back to this strategy of, kind of symbiosis between classes. I don't know.
Well, and to kind of elaborate on that, to what extent will a center strategy just kind of either by necessity go towards a left strategy or just kind of slip back into a right socialist strategy using that McNair schematic. And I think this is a historical example of that. And so many fun fact, the center-right party in Portugal is called Social Democrats. Yeah, that's not unheard of. But what was I going to say? This is an example of that, and of that tendency to slip right wing. And McNair would probably try to argue that parties that end up not wanting to smash the state are right according to his schematic and not center. But
I know. I didn't even say he's wrong. I'm just makes me suspicious.
Well, I'm skeptical too, because then why hasn't that happened? Why hasn't that Kautskian strategy ever really panned out in history? Using the same kind of empirical metric that he's citing for mass strikes not working.
Right, exactly.
And I'm not even on board with we have to do mass strike. That is the strategy. I'm just saying I'm skeptical of the whole thing ultimately.
But his neo-Kautskian strategy hasn't been tried.
That's fair. That's fair.
That's the point. It's a new. It's a foot forward as a new strategy. That's the I think that's his whole point. It's taking the best parts of
the part that's
why doesn't it? Why hasn't it?
Why hasn't it? Because we live in time in history. If things have to come out,
right? But okay, what we end up in these situations. There's repeated choices that we make in the game theory way. What is it about these situations that creates that collapse of the center? Right? That's the question.
But the thing is as well is though, say for example, in poker, say for example, or in chess, theoretical and strategic leaps are made, new insights are gained, people come in and they mash things up, so new political strategies can come into also different terrain, But I think more likely just new strategies will be formed. And like, we can't just say, well, why didn't no one try this one before? Because they have to actually be tried in history. We're still dealing with the fallout of the last political decisions that were made in 1880. Literally, it's that is washing still through our society, those decisions. So we can't be too hard on like ourselves saying, oh, well, nothing's worked so far, nothing can work.
And I'm not trying to be hard on ourselves. I'm just kind of thinking, I think we're both just kind of questioning like the McNair strategy, like, and I mean, okay, so I guess I'm trying to refresh my memory. Like, what is the difference between neo-Kautskyan and Kautskian argument? Like, as far as I can recall, the part of the strategy that's about, getting the Democratic majority and then dissolving the Special Party of Armed Men and that triggering a socialist civil war. That part that comes straight from Kautsky. Am I wrong? Or
yeah, but like the bit like
Engels.
they made
Engels, right?
The bit they made the mistake is that they went in with the right, and his essential difference is to stay with the right and always stay and don't join in with the right. That's his main difference. Am I correct? That's the original sin. Yeah.
Except that he assumes that there's only one right that you could join in with, and that is the parliamentary right, which, I mean, the parliamentary right of social democracy, and the jingoist, I guess, is what he's defining as right there. I mean, in addition to being purely politically determined, I also just think if you do that, then you don't actually, he doesn't really deal with the fact that the working class in any advanced capitalist nation never, ever, 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 ever backed the left of social democracy. Mm-hmm. It did not happen anywhere on earth.
What do you mean? They didn't back the left of social democracy, or
right?
Those to the left of social democracy.
Both, actually. They did not back in significant numbers the left of social democracy, which is why in those groups they were usually minority factions. And when they separated, they did not back the communists or left socialist groups en masse either. They only did in areas that were not really advanced capital, and that's like
there was large communist parties in Europe, though. Derek.
Yeah, but they didn't ever win. So
but that doesn't mean.
But
they had
doesn't win. Failed.
But that's not a good argument. Like, I'm not making the case that they could have had the correct strategy, but I'm saying like you get into a battle, you're playing poker, you get into a situation you can play right, so things can just fall the other way and you lose. It doesn't necessarily mean, look, the Communist Party, the communists initially probably would have won the election had it not been for a fraud in the late 40s.
I think that this is a game that's been repeated many times as similar outcomes, and without some kind of change in the rules or change in dynamic. I mean, unfortunately, the old dynamics of the 20th century are gone. Oh, great. But like, without something changing, I think you're likely to continue getting these outcomes where people don't listen to the Martovs. They don't listen to the people that get all these questions right. Like, and why are these electoral outcomes how they are? Why do things split along the lines that they do? And to some extent, Tom, I mean, you're not wrong. The influence of LaSalle and then Lenin, like, it never really goes like, it's like, I can't even say it's shaken out in the wash now when we're in vastly different strategic situation. But
like it looks to me like the I don't know if it's an error, like, because we haven't seen all of history yet. We haven't seen the next 1,000 years, right? But like it seemed that if it is true, the error of Marx was not seeing the tendency for people to go with the nation state ahead of the international class. Now, you could also make the case that the international proletarian class has to learn its lesson from its failures in history.
The thing is that you'd have to actually make it clear that the international proletarian class had immediate interest and in learning those failures. And frankly, given the bounds of nation states, they don't. I mean, like, I'm sorry that I'm about to say this, but like, one, I consider the Stalinist that McNair is willing to see as part of, the left that you should be and willing to be in coalition with, as actually a different form of right that you should not be in coalition with. But two,
I concur.
There's a bound choice. There's a bound choice theory when you're dealing only in terms of nations that's going to lead people towards social democratic light reforms and mild nationalism. And it kind of works out mathematically in a way. If you read Adam Perarski, it hurts because it hurts. It maps real well, and it mathematically maps. It's like it's a set of choices, and it's actually a rational choice. And that's
I'm just like I'm fucking amazingly hyper skeptical. Like you do that. You do the game theory,
I mean,
or take the prisoner problem for example, Derek. Right?
How come my prediction odds on every election has been based on a lot of this stuff, and I have better odds than you? Like just gotta point that out. Like,
well, okay, I got a clarifying question.
I'm talking. Wait, now I was saying something. Yeah. So, the strategies haven't changed, so of course they're going to fucking give the same fucking outcomes. B, you take the prisoner problem. You know, the one where, if you both coordinate together, you'll both get free. And if you don't, you fuck each other, you both go to prison, and everybody, it's in their rational interest to fuck each other and go to prison, right? But when they do the math of when they repeat the experiment, it flips the other way where they should both do it. So the logic games that you can set up, like, these are games just to show you they're not the system.
Well, this is what I agree with you. The thing is, when you say this, we're still always dealing in terms of nation states, and the only way to get past that is international cooperation. However, the other problem with the McNair formula is that, frankly, the Western European unions, and actually the unions of Eastern Europe, because ironically they end up liquidated by the Soviets in a really kind of backwards way, but they do. And the North American unions are in no way mass enough to coalesce to form workers' parties. And so you skip the historical step where those workers' parties emerged historically as coalitions of unions and go directly to political parties.
Yeah.
All right. You can't do that. There's nothing to merge with. It does not exist. And so, like, the whole McNair formula is based on two things. One condition would be true if it existed, but it doesn't. And two, the other, like, it's calculus. He doesn't propose a proper way to deal with the fact that even within the international, you are still acting as national parties, and there's still incentives to screw each other, particularly if one party achieves power first and tries to dominate, i.e., the Russian part of the Soviet and the second and the second and third. I mean, particularly in the third international. Okay,
and
that's
so
a big problem.
In order for the comparison to the iterated prisoner's dilemma to work, you need a consistent actor that is going through both prisoner's dilemmas in a way, or some set of institutions that's capable of learning a lesson in that way. That's what you need. That's where people want to have, and revolutionary patience has and that whole like way of looking at organizing has its really has its like in my life at least. The reason that I thought that was important was watching things spring up and die away and make the same mistakes, or seemingly make the same mistakes. Like and it seemed like there wasn't. Seemed like the enemies of the people rising up, they had coherent institutions. They could learn their lessons. They could, accumulate like, tactical data. Like, can we? Where is our actor?
Yeah, like, none of the actual left political strategies in my lifetime have been different than ones that Marx is probably going to talk about here. None. Anybody? Does that Baptiste?
I would agree with you. My big thing with that is just that there is no one has proposed a counter structure for which this stuff could learn since the fall of the Soviet Union. And even with the Soviet Union, you had the other prisoners dilemma, aka its tendency towards Bonapartism and the centralization of the state, and thus the creation of a non-democratic bureaucracy that you can't get rid of, and thus basically forms a new class that no one really wants to deal with. You pick one or the other, but you never deal with both. And the other thing is, like, no one's talking about how you really reinvent the workers' movement, and when the industrial proletariat model that those were based off of and those forms of organization were really were only possible because of doesn't exist. Until you got that, you got nothing.
Yeah, you got nothing, because you got to fucking you got to build shit up. It doesn't exist right now. But it's like it didn't exist in 1849 when Marx went to the fucking library. You know, doesn't mean that they mightn't have had strategies.
But that's not just what I'm saying. I'm also saying that the form of labor that was based off of doesn't exist anymore. So you can't go back to that either.
So you got different forms. So you got different things that need to come out of stuff. Look, the key point, like, is that capital always will end up in crisis. Yeah, and that there is antagonisms there. Now, are we saying that antagonism is just forever stuck in this fucking nationalist bullshit, or is it possible to get out of it? You know, if we're Marxists and we think it's possible to get out of it, you know, if you don't think it's possible to get out of it, look, there's no point in fucking reading any of this shit, if you ask me.
Well, I mean
like, if you come to that conclusion, you might as well just fucking go.
Well, that's not what's being said. Just, you know,
I know, but it kind of
doesn't work. This doesn't work. That doesn't work.
I know, but
it's not the same as saying, you know, there's no way out.
It's different, because you're saying, like, that I say, look, whatever, fucking, I'm not a McNairist or anything. I think that it's a reasonable strategy. That's the way I would put it, right? Given the conditions, that if it had proper conditions for it, it doesn't have them now. Say it would be interesting to see it. It'd be interesting to see it tried. It's dependent on other shit, right? But like that, we're not, like, the thing is to say is, like, there are strategies that can be tried that haven't been tried, you know, or else we're just stuck in fucking capitalist dystopia forever.
Well, I think to clarify what Derek and Esri are saying, they're not saying that there is no strategy to get out of this national determinant. But I think what they are saying is that they don't think McNair's strategy can do that, unless I'm misunderstanding.
Yeah, you got. I think McNeil's strategy could have possibly worked if it was actually done the way articulated in, like, 1920.
Yeah.
14.
Yeah.
But
I don't even think that. I don't think so.
like I mean, honestly, like, if you like Martov was articulating something like this, basically, like something like what Lenin is getting at in, like, 1918, because after the Soviet state is created, and after the Russian Civil War starts, you know, Martov drops his, like, Kautskian sort of pretenses and being like, well, all right, I accept this new Soviet state. It's better than the White Army, you know, whatever. But, like, let's keep, you know, trying to make this a democratic project. Let's, like, have pluralism, and, you know, let's get rid of the death penalty and all this stuff. Like, you know, there are people that, like, you know, try to square the circle in history, and God, they just get trounced. They just get trounced and forgotten and buried under statues of, like, you know, Lenin or a big mustache.
Well, I mean, yeah, to be fair to Lenin actually did respect Martov even after that, and was really sad when he died. But, you know, everyone's sad when everybody dies. So
too little, too late, dude.
Yeah.
He was very sad when he shot him in the head. No,
well, he's sad when Stalin used the power that Lenin gave Stalin to essentially, like, deny him aid, deny Martov aid. That might have saved his life.
Yeah, basically, Stalin kept the money that he was supposed to appropriate to. But anyway,
we're way off track here, aren't we?
Well, I mean,
this is not called the fucking revolutionary strategy thing. Who brought this motherfucker up?
We're
on to.
I have not really had anything to add to the discussion about McNair, but while we're talking about this catastrophic defeat of the Social Democrats, I do think that, you know, Marx's extremely harsh denunciation of the Social Democrats here I think could also be applied against the socialists in Chile. And right now, I'm doing a reading group series on Brain of the Firm over on General Intellect Unit's Discord. We're reading weekly chapters, and towards the end of that book, Stafford Beer tries to formulate a strategy for how the Chilean socialists could have won. So I'm very interested to read that and see if it squares with the kinds of criticisms that Marx has here of like, well, if you're going to do a revolutionary confrontation, why didn't you think of the army and why didn't you arm yourselves, right? So that's just my thought on it for this moment. I don't know exactly what Beer has to say yet, but I'm interested to see where that goes as kind of like you were saying, Tom, a alternate strategy from the ones that have been tried. Because they were trying something different in Chile. It didn't work at all. So
yeah. You need to split the army. It's the only reason why look at the difference between Venezuela and Brazil. Venezuela are still in power because they have basically, I think they have political education at the base level of the army. It's probably a big reason, and the generals behind. Anyway,
you're talking about Bolivia, yeah?
No, in Venezuela. In Venezuela, versus Brazil.
Yeah, but Venezuela versus, I think you mean
Brazil.
Bolivia. But...
No, Brazil.
Okay.
Brazil too. Brazil too. You know, they're both two coups. You know, essentially. Now let's have a look. One is a coup by the courts, and another is a coup by the, I don't know what the fuck you call them. Right now, let's stop. Let's stop here. We're on 2.5 fucking hours nearly. We'll come back to these few little paragraphs because there's quite a meat in them, and there's a lot in this chapter. We got further than I thought. We only have about I don't know. We only have about 8 pages left in this chapter.
So
we are.
Yeah, go ahead.
What? No, you go ahead. Go on.
We'll talk about this off air. I was just thinking about the strategy problem because there is a corresponding strategy problem with the army, where the army eats up more and more of your resources and what you do, and that happens in North Korea, and really it's happened in Venezuela. It's basically a Bonapartist state because of the relationship with the army, but it makes it almost, you can't coup it, but it also doesn't have to follow the will of the workers' councils that empower it either, and doesn't. So,
but it's also highly isolated as well, isn't it? You know. Like, even though there was that, is it the pink tide of South America, whatever, they still weren't very integrated. There were just a few fucking political elections, really.
All I have to say at the end of this is this is giving me flashbacks to when daddies were arguing during the McNair series. Stop arguing, daddies. Stop it.
Am I daddy? Who's the daddy here? Derek, I'm actually older than Derek. Am I the oldest loser here? Who else here? Kyle, what age you?
35.
Kyle.
35. God.
Kyle's
I
clearly
would not
younger.
have guessed that.
James?
I'm only 36.
Oh, fuck's sake. 42. My God.
Well, see, we need Doug Lane
cunt.
here because with Doug, we'd have a someone who's about to be 50, and so we could have blamed it all on him.
That's the Doug makes you feel good when you get into this age game.
I don't know if we need a third daddy though. I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
I yell at Doug, but I yell at Doug less in public than I yell at Tom in public, and I yell at Tom less in private than I yell at Doug.
What do you call it? I never knew you were such a conservative, Sophie. You only want 2 daddies.
Yeah, I'm maintaining the bourgeois family form. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah. Took the words out of my mouth, Tom.
Oh shit! Somebody's calling me. Who the fuck's calling me?
All right,
I'm getting a call here. Let me just go offline here.
Let's go offline. I can read the chat. People, if you want. All right, let's see. We had we got Erica Whelan, Benjamin Hanshu, Red Tide, Stank, who's thirsting on fucking AOC.
Okay, Stank.
God.
Stank.
Yeah, Coco.
I thirst after AOC. In fairness,
and
is
then,
that right? Is that right?
Yeah.
No AOC feet pics.
Yeah, none of that.
Do they exist? Tell me more.
Moving on. Paul Carlson. Red Tide, Grimlock. Let's see. Oh, Jara Handala. Thank you for the corrections again.
Yeah, Jara Handala and Erica are good at correcting me when I compress time, and also like good at making very insightful and relevant commentary that we miss. So
yeah,
comments
for sure.
on this one.
Yeah, Jara Handala, Erica Whelan. Thanks. I already read Benjamin Hanshu. I already read
Grimlock. We got Grimlock.
Grimlock. We already got. All right, I did those. We have some clowns named Derek Varn and Ezra XP. We got Will-eyed Oney. Okay, I get it.
That's a regular.
Stephen T. Okay.
Stephen T. I didn't see him.
Yeah, Stephen T's in here.
Oh, Coco.
And, we got shout outs to Comrade Peck in the chat. All right, nice.
Who the fuck is Comrade Peck?
Jamie Peck
of the Antifada and
the Majority Report. Yeah.
Is he any good?
Yeah.
So Michael Brooks is going to do a show. Let's take this offline. Okay, let's see.
That's why. No, but that's why. That's especially why. Jamie Peck, when you look at the Majority Report, I mean, she's the voice of reason. Anyway, so we got what is this? Guillermo Marquez. Oh, Jesus, I'm so sorry. Thank you for coming. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And
maybe Kyle needs to read all the names because there's some French ones.
Yeah, if we don't want to alienate every French person, perhaps
we don't want to alienate every French person.
I do not. You know what? No, I've reconsidered this because I realized my enemy was Americans who gesture towards the French. I realized that was my real target and that I'd been probably missing my target.
I'm going to have to fucking edit this shit. Let's end it. Fuck this.
You don't have to edit it. It's the end. Bye.
Yeah.
Just cut it.
Thank you, everyone.
See
Bye. Merci.
Bye.